The objective of this analysis is purely academic. By evaluating a hypothetical case study through the interdisciplinary frameworks of South Korean U.S. international relations, diplomatic security, political crime, psychology, and criminal behavior analysis, we seek to understand the structural mechanics of regime collapse, institutional decay, and power privatization. This lecture does not aim to target or slander any real-world individuals. Rather, it utilizes an abstracted narrative to illustrate how political authority erodes when governance, rule of law, and strategic alliances break down. If you find this geopolitical and psychological breakdown insightful, please subscribe, like, and share this channel to support further academic research and content delivery. Academic lecture: an analysis of power collapse and institutional decay. Overview: historical trajectories and hypothetical case. Studies of political failure. Let us examine a series of hypothetical developments surrounding the decline of right-wing governance in South Korea, followed by the systematic breakdown of the current political regime. First, the impeachment of a conservative female president. Under severe political pressure driven by internal betrayal and coordinated ideological agitation from the political left, the administration failed to complete its constitutional term. The resulting removal from office facilitated a rapid transfer of power to a far-left administration. Second, the collapse of a former prosecutor general's presidency. Despite pursuing high-profile anti-corruption investigations into major urban development scandals and attempting to pass strict anti-espionage legislation, the administration faced insurmountable opposition in a minority-governed parliament. Following an attempt to declare emergency martial law, the president encountered immediate resistance from within the judicial apparatus, including the Corruption Investigation Office, for high-ranking officials, the military, and the police. This culminated in the president's arrest and a prosecutor seeking the maximum legal penalty in court. Third, legitimacy controversies surrounding the current left-wing leader, facing persistent domestic and international debates. Regarding electoral transparency and constitutional legitimacy, the current leadership remains in power as of mid-2026, aligning with preliminary foreign media forecasts. Fourth, institutional sabotage and the failure of personnel reform. A president who entered office with no prior legislative or political experience failed to overhaul entrenched political appointees left behind by the preceding administration. This yields a critical lesson in statecraft. A failure to conduct thorough personnel reform regarding entrenched appointees allows those same institutional networks to offer severe structural resistance during a crisis, ultimately dismantling the administration from within. Fifth, judicial exposure and criminal proceedings. The current leader, possessing 4 prior criminal convictions, remains under active trial concerning illicit financial transfers to North Korea. Simultaneously, a key co-conspirator and former vice governor of Gyeonggi Province has had a guilty verdict finalized by the Supreme Court. Sixth, judicial immunity and suspended proceedings. Key figures in major land development scandals received first-instance guilty sentences. However, judicial proceedings against the chief executive himself have been suspended following his assumption of the presidency. Seventh, diplomatic isolation and protocol friction. During an official visit to the United States, administrative protocol was severely compromised. Airport reception was minimalized, and access to Blair House was denied. These incidents illustrate significant judicial exposure for the leadership, translating into diplomatic isolation and disrespect within the international arena. Eighth, arbitrary governance and domestic administrative abuses. Domestic policy execution demonstrates erratic administrative behavior. High school baseball players faced a 6-month athletic suspension merely for attempting to purchase Starbucks products, triggering public outrage. State directives were issued demanding private enterprises produce ultra-low-cost feminine hygiene products, alongside state pressure to forcibly relocate semiconductor industrial bases to Gwangju, distorting fundamental market ecosystems. Furthermore, state pressure was applied to advertisers, to withhold revenue from media organizations, reporting on election transparency concerns, resulting in blank-page publication protests. Legislative proposals were introduced to impose up to 5 years of imprisonment for criticizing specific foreign nations or racial groups, raising severe concerns regarding freedom of speech, and the weaponization of the law for political suppression. Concurrently, during public demonstrations at Olympic Park, advocating for election transparency and hand count auditing, the Commissioner General of the National Police Agency issued public threats warning demonstrators that they would face personal and financial ruin. Ninth, strategic and economic retaliation by the United States. In response to legal rulings regarding reciprocal tariffs, the U.S. Trump administration invoked Section 301 of the Trade Act, initiating an expedited investigation aimed at imposing tariffs by late July 2026. Additionally, South Korea was abruptly excluded from a ministerial level summit convened by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio addressing transnational far-left terrorism. The leadership's anti-market autocratic domestic policies, combined with far-left diplomatic alignments, have produced severe national interest losses, including economic retaliation from the U.S. administration and exclusion from core security partnerships. Deep dive analysis, the 5-stage model of regime collapse. The aforementioned cases transcend standard political friction. They reflect a complete breakdown of state apparatuses and the moral and practical bankruptcy of the regime. Evaluated against the 5-stage model of power collapse, the current administration has entered Stage 5 systemic collapse and governance inoperability, entering an end-stage phase. We analyze this terminal phase through 4 core analytical axes. 1. Complete loss of legitimacy. 2. Privatization and failure of executive authority. 3. Economic and administrative bankruptcy. 4. International isolation. Stage 5 dynamics complete systemic breakdown. Stage 5 represents a condition in which a regime completely loses its practical capacity to govern through constitutional order or standardized administrative procedures. The extinction of legitimacy. Persistent doubts surrounding electoral integrity, coupled with a leader carrying 4 criminal convictions and escalating judicial exposure, completely strip the administration of moral justification. The defection of public enforcement organs. When the military, prosecution, and police choose self-preservation over executing executive orders or publicly reject presidential directives, the structural skeleton of the state governance system has shattered. Irrational governance directives disregarding basic market economics such as commercial bans, price controls, and forced industrial relocation indicate that executive power is being exercised through impulsive psychological discharge rather than rational statecraft. Detailed breakdown across the 4 axes. 1. Total collapse of legitimacy. Allegations of fraud and criminal liability. When an executive assumes power under fundamental doubts regarding electoral transparency, all derivative legal authority becomes vulnerable to being perceived as invalid. Foreign perception of legitimacy. Early international media reporting, framing the election outcome through high probabilities of systemic manipulation, indicates that global observers viewed the administration not as a product of democratic processes, but as an engineered usurpation. Judicial realization finalized, guilty verdicts for key co-conspirators in North Korean transfer cases and land development scandals legally demonstrate that core elements of the administration operate analogously to a political syndicate. This firmly establishes in the public mind that the executive branch is acting as a legal defendant rather than a guardian of the rule of law. 2. Extinction of executive capability, institutional resistance, and internal fragmentation. The retention of unvetted political appointees demonstrates self-destructive systemic behavior. The role of embedded institutional elites, administrative, judicial, and security elites, appointed under previous administrations, initially served as critical operational assets. However, once the current regime's legal and ethical liabilities exceeded a critical threshold, these institutional actors prioritized self-preservation, turning their authority against the executive. Consequences of power privatization. Attempts to secure loyalty through conciliation rather than rigorous administrative discipline were interpreted as weakness. Consequently, during acute crises, internal elites became the primary agents of institution. Resistance, a classic symptom of late-stage power collapse. 3. Diplomatic isolation, the breakdown of strategic alliances. Friction in diplomatic protocol and exclusion from high-level security dialogues demonstrate that the administration is no longer categorized as a standard partner by key allies. Protocol status and trust rejections regarding presidential housing and minimalized reception reflect a complete downgrade in diplomatic standing. Foreign leadership perceives association with the executive as a distinct domestic political risk. Exclusion from security dialogues. Exclusion from U.S.-led ministerial conferences on extreme political movements signifies that the administration's ideological posture is viewed by allies with deep strategic skepticism, amounting to a de facto revocation of trusted security partner status. 4. Administrative irrationality and economic crisis. Policy decisions driven by erratic impulse rather than expert deliberation destroy state economic stability. Anti-intellectual economic policies. Forcible industrial relocation, micro-regulation of personal consumption, and weaponized advertising boycotts against news organizations actively undermine national economic productivity. Erosion of public trust, threatening citizens, with state force for raising concerns over voting procedures, shifts the public perception of law enforcement from a protective service to an oppressive apparatus, serving as a catalyst for widespread civil unrest. The final phase scenarios of regime termination. Impending U.S. economic sanctions under Section 301 and exclusion from security architectures signify an imminent internal collapse, driven by external economic and diplomatic shocks. Economic collapse accelerated. Trade investigations threaten core industrial export engines as unemployment and commercial insolvencies escalate. Public tolerance for an administration, already burdened by legitimacy controversies, vanishes completely. Dissolution of internal cohesion. Judicial immunities and state enforcement protections collapse rapidly under severe fiscal strain and external diplomatic pressure. Core administrative elites will seek exits or open covert communications with opposition structures. The administration under review exhibits the final characteristics of Stage 5 governance inoperability. As executive authority retreats into isolation, relying on erratic decrees and public coercion, core state systems, economic, diplomatic, and security operate outside state control, effectively attacking the regime's own stability. When a government loses moral authority and retains only coercive force, a force that itself lacks institutional trust, it exhibits the classic terminal phase of authoritarian decay, inevitably resulting in collapse through economic exhaustion or systemic internal displacement. To conclude today's lecture, we reflect upon a classical warning from ancient Eastern philosophy, found in the Mencius, 맹자, 몽즈. 적국 외환이 없는 자는 국항망이라. 대국외환 우저, 국흥왕. A state that lacks principled opposition within and clear external threats to keep it. Vigilant is a state destined for internal ruin. When a political regime devotes its power entirely to suppressing domestic opposition, silencing free press, and dismantling institutional checks, it creates a dangerous illusion of absolute control. Yet, as ancient wisdom reminds us, a government that destroys its own internal rule of law and alienates its primary international allies loses the capacity for self-correction. What remains is not strength, but a brittle shell that shatters at the first severe external shock. The downfall of such power is never caused solely by its enemies, but by its own hubris and moral decay. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive geopolitical analysis, please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications to stay updated on our upcoming lectures in international security, political crime psychology, and global affairs. See you in the next session.